I was asked, how would I go about automating an online calculator application? Now I have my own online calculator application that I'll show you later on, but this is the one that I was asked about. And this is an application online, it's JavaScript, uses a canvas. You can see that as we're looking at here, there's a lot of ads on the page. They're changing, that would impact the DOM. That's potentially a risk if I wanted to automate it. I can see that when I interact with the application, I'm using the mouse at this point. So in theory, I could issue mouse events in here. However, mouse can be quite hard to work with, and I'd have to calculate the position based on the canvas and the particular buttons, and that would be a little bit harder to automate. I can see that there's the use the online calculator in full screen here. That doesn't get rid of the ads, so that's potentially still a risk. And this is also in an iframe, which again might impact what I'm doing with the automating. So if I was going to work with this, I would probably take this out of the iframe and work with it full screen directly with just the calculator in place like that. Now that's a little bit easier to work with. And we can see that without the iframe, it resizes nicely. There's no ads. So this is probably how I would want to work with it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look at the technology of the application. And you can see the sources up here, but that's not where I normally start. Where I start is looking in the element tab. So I can see that this is the canvas. We've taken it out of the iframe. So now we just have the canvas in here. It's a lot easier to read and work with. We know that if I click with the mouse, then I can make things happen on screen. And I can use the keyboard. That might be an easier way of automating it because I don't have to worry about position of the mouse and the relative position of the buttons. So we got rid of some of the risks, which are the ads. If we automate through the keyboard or some other mechanism, then we're getting rid of the need to simulate the mouse and click on specific parts of the canvas, which can be very hard. I may be able, rather than sending events, I may be able to interact with the application code directly, but we haven't looked at the source code yet. So the first experiment we did was we took out the iframe. That's working. The next experiment I want to do is see which parts of the code work. So the way I'm going to do that is by inspecting to get the element up. Then with this element, I'm going to right click and say break on attribute modifications to put this breakpoint in. There's the breakpoint on. So now if I hover over the screen, we can see that it's now paused in the debugger, and it's paused in this create.js file. I'll print this. And this is a framework. This is using the create.js application. So this is at a lower level than I really want to work. Let me go back to elements. So I'm going to switch off the break on attribute modifications because I don't really want to work at that level. But back in the source now, if I have a quick look at the source code, which is being delivered through PHP, I can see that we've got some CSS in there, and I can see all the basic code for setting up this application. And we can see that we've got some main events here. So we've got some high-level JavaScript functions for handling keyboard events, and they've been mapped to event listeners in the code. So I could probably start automating at the JavaScript level using these functions here rather than trying to dispatch events. So that's where my first focus would be. And I can also see that there's a main object here. And if I go into the console and type main, I have access to this high-level global object that represents the calculator. So I might be able to go in there, but it looks like the main functions that we've got access to are, again, these event handlers that take an event. So I have to try and figure out how to simulate some sort of event. And those are keyboard events. So when I'm faced with keyboard events, I'm going to look up the description of keyboard events in the Mozilla developer documentation to see how they work and how to trigger them and what arguments they need. So I've got access to my documentation. What I need to do is experiment a little bit. So I'm going to use one of the console commands to help me, which is the monitor events command. So I'm going to say monitor events on the window, and we're going to monitor the key down events. So I use that command, go back to the main window. If I start pressing keys, there's 3, 4, there's 5. I can see the event in here. And this is telling me that when I pressed 5, we got a keyboard event for this key 5, which is a code digit 5, the key code 53, a whole bunch of different things. And there's a lot of attributes in that event. So first of all, I want to see if that event will actually work. So what I'm going to do is replay that event. And the way I'm going to do that is by clicking on the event in here and storing as global variable. So that's now stored this particular keyboard event as temp1. So I can use one of the built-in functions in the application, the iframe keyboard event, and I'm going to pass it the event that we just recorded. So if this works, then we'll see 5 appear on the screen. That one didn't. Let me clear it to make it a little more obvious. So the other keyboard event we've got is iframe keyboard event down. Let's try that. So this is temp1, and that does nothing. So final one must be the charm. So that's keyboard event press, temp1, and there we go. So now I know that for simple starting with automating, I don't have to really learn how dispatch events work. I can just use this iframe keyboard event press, which is in the application itself directly, which we saw in the source code, the HTML source code for the application. Now, this iframe keyboard event press calls the keyboard event from outside press function in the main code, but I don't really need to worry about that because I'm just going to use this one here for the moment. So what I need to do now is trim this event down to the bare minimum, because I never want to simulate with a complete event like that. So I'm going to first unmonitor the events from the window, key down. So yep, no events showing there. So now we're going to figure out how to trigger a keyboard event. Now all the information is on here. We can see new keyboard event, then the type, then the keyboard event inits, and they're all in there. But if I read and understand the documentation, look on Stack Overflow, eventually I'll get to the point where I can say things like new keyboard. If I could type, then I would write new keyboard event, and I want a key press event, key press, and I want it to be for a particular key, and that key is going to be the 5 key, because that's what we used before. We see that in the event there, key 5. So I'm just going to try and simulate that here. So that has created an event. Now we need to send that to the application. So if I do, I'll copy and paste this, and iframe keyboard events press, because that's the one that worked, and that didn't work. So we've got a little bit more to figure out for how this application interacts with the keyboard events. Now I know that there are multiple ways in which the keyboard event can be sent. So we could have the key command, the code is in there, possibly the key code, possibly the char code, possibly which. I'm not sure which of these events, which of these attributes is the important one. So to help me, I'm going to have a quick look in the source code. And this time I'm not going to look in the index.php, I'm going to look in the main.js. So this is the code for the application. I'll pretty print it, so it makes it a little bit more readable. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do a find. So Control F or Command F on the Mac. I'm going to look for dot key. Right, so I can see dot key, but we know that it doesn't work with the key attribute, so no point looking for that. Let's look for code. Dot code, that's not mentioned. And what I'm looking for are these attributes here. So we've done dot key, dot code. Well, let's look for dot char code. Dot char code. Didn't work. And make sure if you're doing this, you don't have the regular expression search on, because the dot will mess this up. So we've done char code. So let's have a look at which. And we've got which. So we can see in the code here that when it's the 8 key code, it will do something. What else have we got? When it's 67, 220, so there's some key values in there. And then here's the main one. When it's a key press, then we're looking at the main code. So if I can use which in my event, this will probably work. So let's go back to the event. And rather than now which uses an integer, not the string value. The easiest way for me to find the key codes, and there's a whole bunch of easy ways, I'm just going to show you a very simple way. There's a website called Keycode Info. If I press the key 5, then we can see that it's the event key 5 and it's the which 53. So if I pass in 53 to which here, then we should get 5. So rather than key 5, I want which 53, and as if by magic, nothing happens. And that's because I'm on Chrome, and Chrome likes the key code. So if I put key code in there, 53, then we can see it. Now the reason I'm laughing is if I go into Firefox and get the inspect up, I'll take the same code, put that in the console. There we go, that works. If I get rid of the key code and just put in which, that works. And here, if I get rid of the key code and just put in which, doesn't work on Chrome. If I get rid of the which and just put in the key code, then that works fine. But on Firefox, I get rid of the which and just keep the key code, and that doesn't work. This is one of the issues with cross-browser automating in the console. We have to learn what is the best way of triggering events for the different browsers. Now, if we're working in the console level, chances are it's less of an issue because we're probably only going to be working in one browser. But I'm going to use which and key code just to be safe in case you want to experiment on both. So I can now trigger a key press. If I do key code 52, we get 4. So I can work through the keys and the characters to work out what I want to trigger. Now at the moment, we're using the application against itself. So we're triggering the events using the iframe keyboard event press, which is a function in the actual application itself, which is listed there in the main HTML file. So I'm going to learn how to trigger the event directly. So I need to say document, and then I want to pass in a particular element, and this is going to be the canvas element, which has an ID of canvas. That's good, that's nice and easy to automate. So I'll say document by ID canvas, and then we want to dispatch an event to that particular element, and it's the event that we already triggered. So this new keyword event for the which and key code 53, and one extra thing, because we're dispatching an event, I want to make sure that it bubbles so that it goes up through the DOM if necessary. And if I hit that, now we can trigger 5 without using the application itself, and we're triggering the keyword events that will make this happen. So now, what would I have to do to model the application? Now, if I look through the application source, I can see that there's a lot of information in here about which key presses it's going to work, which keys it maps onto, and I could model this in a really complicated way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a really naive way and assume that all of these key presses I want to use map onto the key codes. So if I hit slash, it'll map onto divide, times will map onto times, minus, minus, plus, plus. And I'm going to use the key codes to do that. So by that I mean, if I take the number 1, the key code is actually matching the, in fact, let's use 5 because we've seen that. So the key code matches the character code. So if I say car code at, and then position 0 in the string, which is the first one, 53. 5 turns into 53, which is what we saw from the key code. So if I use the char code at, then we might be able to feed in a string. So let's do a quick prototype. I'm going to say 12 plus 48 divided by 10 equals. And hopefully that maps on to the key presses in the screen. So because that's a string, I'm going to split it into the separate characters. Then for each of those characters, I will run a function. And the function that I'm going to run, function, which will take, because it's in a for each, an item and an index, then the curly brackets, because this is what we're going to do, and I'm just going to console.log this, and I want to log the item, which is the string, and the char code at position 0 for that string, and there we go. So I can see that this string, so we've got 1 and 2, and that is 49.50. So we've got some mappings that work. Let's try and feed this through into the application and see. So we'll take our prototype, and I will just format this a little bit to make it a little bit easier. I could feed this into snippets, but I'm just going to work with this just now. So rather than doing a console log for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that character code and put it in a variable. So I'll say var key code equals the character code for the value, which is pretty much what we just did with the console log. Then I'm going to say the document get element by ID dispatch key press. So I'm just going to cheat and copy and paste this in, because otherwise typing this will be painful. So this is the code that you saw me do before. Document.getElementById canvas. We're going to dispatch an event to it, which is going to be a new keyboard event, which is a key press, which is going to use the key code that we just created here, which will be, if it was 553, and we're going to pass it in as a which value attribute and a key code attribute, and we're going to make sure it bubbles. So this will hopefully send through 1, 2, plus 4, 8, divide 1, 0, equal, and then make the calculator do something. Let's try it. So that's not the answer I was expecting, because I was expecting 12 plus 48, which is 60, divided by 10, which is 6. So under these circumstances, I will do this manually. I'll do this myself. So I'll say 1, 2, plus 4, 8, divided 1, 0, equal, and we get 16.8. So that automated did the same as doing it manually. It's not the answer I would expect, which means that to get the answer I expect, what I probably have to do is 1, 2 plus 48 equals, then divided by 10 equal. Now I'm expecting to see the answer 6. There we go. So we have a basic automation approach. Have a string, take each of the characters. Now I'm not sure which ones map. So if I say, I haven't tried this out, this could fail completely. Let's say 4 minus 2 equals 2. All right. We know that we can do plus. We tried divide. 4 times 2 equals 8. All right, so I've got the basic calculator functions in there. What about the dot? 4.2 times 2 equals, yes. So we can do basic calculator automating with this code. We're not using Selenium. We're not using the application against itself because we're firing in the keyboard events. We're not attempting to automate with the mouse and mouse events because trying to work out the positions of all these buttons is a complete pain. So we saw by looking at the code that it essentially maps onto keyboard events, so that's what we're using. That's as far as I'm going to go with the automating. If you want a slightly different calculator to experiment on, then I have one here on Heroku, and this is DOM based, so it might be a little bit easier, might be a little bit harder. You can see the JavaScript functions it use. That might be a little bit easier, might be a little bit harder. But the point is, we work with the application that we've got. And if you want a challenge, then this one is canvas based. If you want a real challenge, you can use mouse events. I wouldn't do that. You can read the source to see what else it does, how to trigger it. That's always a challenging thing. So I'm grateful that someone pointed out this application because it was fun to work with. And what I wanted to walk you through in this video is the thought process, looking at the risks, looking at the technology, experimenting in different steps until we get to the point where we've got something that basically works that we can build up from. And that is how I approached the automating from the JavaScript console for this online canvas calculator. And if you found this video useful, then remember to subscribe to the channel where we have more videos like this, and check out the blog at EvilTester.com.